regarding which men can you trust and which men can't you trust. But what do you think, Theo? Or is it that all male are toxic, or is male toxicity just a natural thing now?
You just opened up a huge, several different topics actually, Andy. So let's focus on the first thing that you said, which is you started off talking about misogyny and misandry. Now, if we boil it down to the simplicity of what's really going on here, it's that the global narrative has for the moment tired slightly with its old toy of racism, because everyone's going nuts about being politically correct about that, and therefore what it finds is the next thing that people would have laughed at just before the racism, which is the current issue, which is men are bad, and what will happen is and make no mistake, after this is finished, it'll be women are bad, and then it'll be tall people are bad and short people are bad, and then it'll be whether you got a big nose, you're bad. It will get more and more ridiculous, just like the autocracy within within COVID. You know, a year ago, you wouldn't have believed for a second that we'd have been told legally permitted reason for going out. I don't think people remember that when it started snowing, there was one of the newscasters said the government are advising people to walk like penguins. All right, now because they have no idea of what is appropriate anymore, because there is a complete lack of leadership, because leadership is scared. Because we were having this conversation just for the podcast, our leaders are all about avoiding any kind of responsibility, and we'll talk about global leadership apart from, let's be brutally honest, people like Donald Trump, who didn't care, and that was his best selling point. So specifically, because I don't want to wander too far. So I read a really interesting article by Sarah Vine, who I thought was spot on, when she said a law of against misogyny simply highlights and makes women weak. It's a bit like Priti Patel at one point saying, "Don't refer to me as Asian. I'm a person." Now, an Asian woman. Now, the fact is, you have to be proud of who you are. That's what makes you strong, not avoiding it. I am an Asian female. Good for you. All right? Brilliant. Let's tell me what makes you special. Let me hear it. Let me learn about it. Not person.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, there was one thing, because there's one thing, because the thing is, there's always been bad people, you know, both men and women, you know, and let's say
Correct.
there's a lot of bad men out there, but there were also a lot of good men who were probably just as strong, who would be willing to take them on,
What
um,
more?
and
More?
and
Yeah.
and and keep them in their place. But it seems as though as we've evolved more, women chosen to be more independent, which is fine, and I agree with that. That's what they actually want to do. But the thing is, sort of good people or good men are so fearful now of getting involved or getting into a relationship. I mean, I know after the whole Me Too campaign thing, there was, you know, men in corporate companies who were unwilling to actually mentor a woman because they didn't want to be alone in the same room as them. Um, and the thing is,
Nonsense.
bad people wouldn't genuinely care about things like this, whereas good people would actually sort of back off and actually be more respectful of that. But as a consequence of that, what's then happened is that they will not take the bad men on. And I'll give you an example. Like, not that you would call Winston Churchill a good man, but the thing is, you know, if you actually had another Hitler pop up in the world, you would need to have someone who had a good moral standing but could also be highly aggressive to be able to take them on.
Mm.
Would you
Well,
not say that?
you're spot on, and
Sometimes you've always got to be meaner than the evil that you're fighting to be able to overcome them. And we're not doing that anymore because
what
we're looking to sort of, men are becoming, I would say, weaker as a whole. Or
correct.
good.
So they're being emasculated. And indeed, you just reminded me of one of the phrases that Jordan Peterson described in the Bible, called "the meek shall inherit the earth." And And people mistranslate that and misunderstand that and think meek is passive and victim-like. But actually, the real translation of meek is men who have a spear and know how to use it, but choose not to, shall inherit the earth. In other words, you're capable of being dangerous and you show that you are, but you choose not to. That is true nobility.
Yeah, but I think it also brings it back to the whole, you were talking about the global narrative with the way the media is actually functioning in the last, 15 years with social media. You know, the normal person in the street, or I'll backtrack, media do not represent the majority of society. All media are doing is try to they're inciting controversy, inciting arguments, inciting differences. Because I had a conversation with my father the other day. He follows horse racing, Cheltenham specifically the other day. And this woman, this lovely lady jockey, happens to be the champion jockey, won 5 races. And my father, following horse racing for about 50 odd years, was telling me how wonderful that is. And it doesn't happen very often. Isn't it great? And I, as a semi-chauvinist heterosexual man, I'm very, very impartial. I said, and I wanted to have this conversation because I don't follow horse racing. And I said, about the equality of men and women. I said, but tell me why it's such an amazing thing. Is it just because horse racing has been governed by men over the last 150 years? Or tell me, actually, what is it that a man, in terms of a jockey, does or has to be different? What's the difference between men and women regards to being a jockey? Do you need to be stronger? Is there more stamina involved? And I couldn't see it. And my father actually couldn't pursue with the conversation because there were no reasons. So as far as I'm concerned, it's just the establishment not allowing women in, purely and simply. I don't see an issue. I think it's great that she's celebrated, but I don't see why a woman should be celebrated from being a woman jockey when she can be as capable as a man. And that's why I think what I'm saying is we're so politically correct now and so blinded that we're following this I don't know if you call it binary narrative of, oh, it's a woman and it's a man. No, it's a person who's doing a great job, who's been allowed in the establishment, and who can she's a great jockey. Well,
the thing is, if you can operate on, and it's about if you can operate at the highest level, why shouldn't you? Well, you shouldn't be restricted from that.
Exactly.
Well, that's the whole point. You see, we have the same rights, but we don't have the same abilities. And that's the fundamental difference between capitalism and communism, isn't it? Where communism seeks the same outcome for everyone, whereas capitalism seeks at the same rights to give people the chance to excel, but you'll reach different levels.
They seek the opportunity, isn't it? Everyone has the same opportunity. What you do with that opportunity.
Political correctness, of course, is communism, because it's all about saying, no, you have to have the same outcome. And that's the huge problem. For instance, talking about the sexes, unfortunately, political correct permeated into the military. But the military actually, because they have to, they cannot risk failing, they quickly figured out that, unfortunately, in the front line, most women, not all, interesting, but most women are not suitable to be in the front line because they don't have the speed and the strength. And the first people to really look into this were the Israeli military, which is probably why Gal Gadot left the Israeli military and instead played Wonder Woman. Made far more money as well.
And that was the argument for the LTA, the Lawn Tennis Association, in regards to Wimbledon. There was always this argument. I followed tennis for many, many years. I've been to Wimbledon and I love the sport. Can't play it for I can't even try to play tennis. But the point is, there was always this argument as to why can men go to a 5-set game and women can go to 3 sets. And there was at the same time, in parallel, the argument that women should be paid the same. And it's the complete contradiction. It's either they can or they can't. And if you can, fine, be paid the same. If you're not able to, because physically you are just not on the same level, then fine, play 3 sets, but you're getting paid less because you're not playing as many hours or minutes.
Well, actually, I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not actually sure about that, Alexei, and I'll tell you why. Because the thing is, because basically sport comes down to money and how much money you generate as a player. Now, if a woman can command and fill the center court of Wimbledon, they're generating the same amount of income for the tennis game that men are as a whole.
Not if one is 3 sets and the other one is 5
That's
sets.
my point.
Yeah, but
That's
the
what
thing
he was
is,
saying.
that's the thing is, it's them who
Bedtime.
choose to actually have 3 sets, because there's no reason why they shouldn't actually have 5 sets either, if
That's
that's
my
the
argument. That's my argument.
But they don't,
Yeah.
do they?
Yeah.
But that's my argument. They
But
don't.
but the thing is, if you can fill, if you can draw the crowds, then you should be paid for being able to draw the crowds. That's why if you actually look at football, for example, the men's Premiership football can actually draw in 60,000-70,000 people a game, whereas the women's game will probably I don't know, probably barely bring in 5 to 10,000 people on a general thing, unless you start looking at internationals.
And
So-
indeed, and I guess, and I have this on fairly good authority that most of them are lesbians anyway. So therefore,
that's irrelevant. I mean, the thing is, I mean,
well, it depends on the audience, doesn't it? If we're brutally honest, because it is about money. But I think what Alexi was saying is fair enough. Fill the centre court.
If you want equality, is what my point.
But he's saying that females do not have the physical stamina to play for 5 sets, and therefore there's less network time and less money, and therefore the prize is less.
But the argument is that women wanted to be paid the same, and then all the men who are arguing it very fairly and in a civilized fashion saying, okay, if you want to be paid the same, then we should all be playing the same rules, same amount of sets, same amount of maximum sets.
Yeah,
and
I accept that, and I accept that. It's like, if you, as I said, if you want to operate at the highest level, then you operate on the same level as everybody else. If you actually want to get the same, providing it has market value. They don't do it for the niceness of the people who are playing. They do it because they actually generate a profit from the people who are actually playing.
That's right. And going back then to what you said about misogyny and misandry, a law against misogyny simply artificially highlights and makes women weak, gives women an excuse to be weak, and gives the more problematic fractions of the feminine society reasons to toxically complain. And of course, there are legitimate complaints, but we're talking about the problematic factions toxically complaining, and therefore increasing the workload of the already stretched police.
Yeah, but let me ask you this: how do you enforce something like misogyny? I
Well,
mean,
that's the other problem, isn't it?
Okay, because
the
thing is, as more and more feminists open up and become more radical in their views that men should have 6 o'clock curfews and that all males are toxic, all it's going to do is actually going to generate more misogyny amongst men who would never really actually ever had an issue with it, are just going to become more distasted with the whole female agenda.
And
before. And it's the same with racism.
And the toxic female jellyfish will be given an excuse to rise to the surface, and that's what the hatred will be focused on by previously healthy men.
So it's an interesting, it's actually not a difficult one. I mean, I'm a guy who's got a daughter, so I actually understand her point of view. But then again, you've actually got to ask every mother who actually has a son, are they going to see them as toxic as they when they grow up? And is it will women actually want to have boys?
And furthermore, what about upskirting? Now, I've been in the gym. I'll admit to being fairly fit, and I've had women, checking out my booty, looking at my pecs, and some of them would even say, and they'll give me positive comments. Does that bother me?
No.
Not you. Well, it depends on who is saying it, to be honest with you. Otherwise, it could do.
But can you say it back?
Can I say it back? Well,
your ego.
We see the thing is,
does it work both ways?
Most ladies, because remember, Andy, you and I interviewed someone about this when Harvey Weinstein was there, and the lady said, look, I've done plenty of stuff that I really shouldn't have done. And quite frankly, I take responsibility for it. And I think most women are like